Welcome everybody. Attendees are loading. We're going to start our webinar in just a couple moments. Welcome everybody. We're expecting a few more folks to join us, so we'll get started in just a moment. All right, I think we will go ahead and get going. Welcome everybody. Good afternoon. It's just after 12. I'm so thrilled you're here. My name is Pamela James. I'm the Executive Director for Campus HR. And this is the very first webinar in a series all about working well remotely. You know, we've been working remotely, most of us, it's been 6 months since middle of March, and here it is middle of September. And it is hard. In HR, we've decided to go ahead and launch this series. And I'll show you the rest of the topics at the end of this. But the first one's very exciting. It's balancing work and life. And I'm your facilitator for today. And in just a few moments, I'll introduce the rest of our panel here. But just really thrilled that you're here. We are recording this, so if you have colleagues who couldn't make it to this, it'll be available on our Working Well website in the future. A bit of housekeeping before we start. First, this is a webinar format, a little different than the Zoom meetings that many of you might be used to. You'll notice down at the bottom, you just have a Q&A box versus a chat box. Also, you can see us, the panelists and the co-hosts, but we can't see you. So you are audio only. So if you have questions, feel free to fill them out in the Q&A, and I'll be monitoring them and throwing them over to the co-hosts and to the speaker, and we'll try to get to as many questions as we can. So now to the main event. So really thrilled to introduce our first co-host. Scott Joslyn is the Chief Information Officer from Health Sciences, and really thrilled to have you, Scott. Why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about your role at UCI and why you feel this topic is important to you.
Thank you, Pamela. Yes, Scott Joslyn here. I'm the Chief Information Officer, CIO, for Health Sciences, the Medical Center and School of Medicine. That basically means I'm responsible for all of IT and its associated things. Been at UCI for 10 months, but I've been a CIO for 20-some years. And I'm interested in this for three big reasons. One, personally, it sort of changed my life and my perspective on things generally. I work completely differently than I did in the past. I was used to breaks between meetings. I used to walk from one meeting to another or across the street. I'm not getting as many steps in. And I find myself working from dawn to dusk sometimes. And I'm finding that's also true with people I work with. Second reason is I have some 225 people that are working remotely now. And for them, it's been a big life change as well. Many of them have kids at home, wondering what's going to happen with all of that. And then I support not just my department, but IT supports a number of other departments that have gone wholesale remote. And we do believe it'll remain in place for some time. It's completely changed the culture of work for sure, and IT is at the root of it. So I come at it from those three perspectives. I'm here to offer whatever thoughts or things that we've learned and impressions. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Dave Leinen and to introduce himself.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. This is Dave Leinen. I'm currently the Interim Associate Provost and Executive Vice Chancellor, back after a 35-year career, retired last year, and I'm back working with the Provost on a number of things. I'm so happy to be participating today. One of the things that I found from coming back is, when we're all part of a common workplace, we interact on a constant basis, exchanging ideas on the fly, even sharing food and laughter and hearing from each other about our lives and families. And for me, I miss those interactions, and I miss walking Ring Road and interacting with the students. And like Scott said, clearing my head between meetings. Was always a very, very valuable part of my work life and my day life for me. You've got to create those breaks now, and you have to be cognizant of that. Attaining a balance of work and life is much more challenging now that our office and workspaces are integrated together. In a certain sense, our families are part of the work environment like they've never been before. And with that, I'd like to just introduce our speaker today, Kenny Zuckerberg. Kenny is the Vice President of Training for ComPsych Guidance Resources. He's Vice President of Training for UCI's Employee Assistance Program, ComPsych, where he strategizes with companies to establish training curricula and delivers executive coaching, presentations, and workshops. Kenny has over 23 years experience as an organizational development consultant and employee training strategist, with a focus on helping companies manage the people side of strategic initiatives. Kenny, it's good to have you, and thanks in advance for all the helpful information you're going to provide to everyone today.
Thanks very much for the nice introduction. I'm going to take a moment here just to share my screen with everybody. Let's get that going. All right, we are ready to go, and I am really thrilled to be part of the event today. That said, I hate to do this. I have to start with some bad news, and it's bad news I'm going to share with you as I show you the agenda for our session. Sometimes people come to a session like this is the bad news, and they think to themselves, okay, great, they brought on our guest speaker. Somebody is finally going to tell us the secret to finding balance in these crazy times we're living in right now. And the bad news I always have to start with is that I have no secrets. I am not even going to give you the answer, the top 3 tips and tricks that will ensure that you feel like your life is in balance, even during these times we're living in today. No secret, no answer. In fact, the reason I say that is that one thing I've learned from doing this kind of training over the years, and I've done it many times, is that there is only one person on our webinar today that knows the answer to how to find work-life balance for you. And it's not me, it's not any of the hosts for the session. You probably guessed who it is. It's you. And the reason for that is that what looks like balance in your life is different from what looks like balance in my life. There are some people out there who would look at what I consider a life of great balance and say that's not fulfilling at all. And so instead of me trying to give you the answers or the secrets to how to find work-life balance, what I try to do is, the first agenda item you see here, help you define what balance means to you. And once you do that, what I'm going to try to do is give you what I hope are some very practical ideas to look at your own life, look at what you're doing, look at the ways you're thinking, and ask yourself, is that working for me? Are there changes that I want to make? And so we're going to start right there with trying to define what balance does mean to you. I'll give you some ideas on how to do that. Second thing we'll do is try to talk about the importance of prioritization in this remote environment we're working with. Sometimes it feels like there is just too much to deal with. I'll tell you, I have 2 kids myself that are starting their first week of school this week, and school looks nothing like it ever has before, as I'm sure some of you are dealing with. It feels overwhelming some days. If I try to take it all on, there's no way I'm going to get it done. And so we'll talk about some, I think, helpful practical ways to prioritize in this challenging environment. And then the third thing is a really serious subject that I think is important to address as we think about work-life balance in these times, and it's loneliness. There was what a lot of people called a loneliness epidemic before we reached the pandemic we're living through now, and that's only getting worse. Some of the symptoms and some of the consequences of loneliness. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that today because I think it's a really important part of feeling like your life is in balance. And then we'll talk finally about just some practical self-care strategies, some things that you probably already know are good for you to do. But if you're like me and you're like almost every other human, knowing the right things to do to take care of yourself doesn't mean you do them. And so I'm going to give you some, I think, again, practical ideas to help make those self-care strategies a real part of your life. All
Hey,
right, well, yeah,
yeah,
I'm gonna pause there. I hear,
yeah, would you mind hiding your floating meeting controls so the box at the top goes away?
right, got it. Yes. Thanks for the reminder. Hopefully that looks better now. I'm actually going to launch right in here with a question for you. I'm not going to ask you to answer it right now. I want you to just reflect on this question. Think about how you would answer it. And this time we're all living in now. If you had to fill in the blank here, I wish I had more time for blank. What would you say? And you can make it something about your home life, something about your professional life, anything you want. But if you had to fill in this blank, what would it be? And you can just reflect on that, but I'm going to tell you the answers that I hear from a lot of people. And I bet there's some of the same ones that you've got. A lot of people tell me, I wish I had more time to spend with my kids. I wish I had more time to focus on my significant other. A lot of people tell me I wish I had more time for fun, just to have some fun these days. And I hear a common theme often, people saying things like, I wish I had more time to work out. I wish I had more time for exercise. I bet that's something that went through some of your heads. It goes through mine sometimes. Those are all really good answers. I bet you have your own that are different from the ones that I just read off, but I bet some of the ones I read off are similar to yours. But I want to break it to you now. This was a little bit of a trick question, because my next suggestion for you is that you never again allow yourself to think or talk this way. I know I tricked you into it, but I'm still going to make this point that I think it's really important when we're striving to feel like our life is in balance to get away from this kind of thinking, this I wish I had more time for thinking, and replace it with something else. I'm going to tell you the something else in a minute, but let me tell you why I think it's important to stop this thinking. I'm about to do some very quick mathematical calculations in my head. I know this will impress you all a great deal, so get ready for it. I'm doing some really high-end math in my head right now. I just completed it. I came up with there are 24 hours in a day. I know you're all very impressed by that. I can even multiply 24 times 7. It's 168 hours in a week. And now I'll break it to you. I didn't actually even do any of that in my head. I have a whole slide about it. 24 hours a day, 168 hours a week, 8,736 hours in a year. And I have some bad news for you. It does not matter how hard you or I wish for more time to do any of those things. It's just not coming. We are going to be stuck with the same 24 hours a day, 168 hours a week for the rest of our lives. So what's the point in saying, I wish I had more time for this or that? And so my suggestion is to replace that way of thinking with something else. And the something else is this. Instead of saying, I wish I had more time for X, Y, or Z, start saying, I prioritize everything else I do with my time higher than those things I wish I could be doing. Think about that for just another moment. I prioritize everything else I do with my time higher than the things I wish I could be doing. Now let's practice that on some of the things that I mentioned earlier. If you're somebody that's been saying, I wish I had more time for exercise, no more of that. I prioritize everything else I do with my time higher than exercising. If you've been saying to yourself, I wish I had more time to spend with my significant other, I know this one's really harder, but I'm still saying we need to do it. I prioritize everything else I do with my time higher than spending more time with my significant other. And now this next one is really hard for us to think about and say, but yes, if you're a person who's been saying, I wish I had more time to spend with my kids, I prioritize everything else I'm doing with my time higher than spending more time with my kids. Now, I want you to reflect on another question now, and it's, why do you think people don't talk the way I'm suggesting? Why do you think we say, and I'm guilty of it too, why do you think we say, I wish I had more time for this or that, even though we all know it's not coming? We all know nobody's dropping off a 25th hour in our day, 169th hour in our week. Why do we do it anyway? And I think there are a couple of answers to that question. One answer is that it's just easier. It's easier to say, I wish I had more time for this or that. Why? Well, there's no call to action, right? It's just something that you're verbalizing and it's passive. Whereas if you start talking about what you prioritize, there's something you might have to do differently, and that's harder. Another reason I think people don't talk the way I'm suggesting, and I think it's fine, and not just fine, it's important to admit this, it's guilt. Sometimes the things we say to ourselves, I wish we had more time to do, the reality is no, we don't. I know there are a lot of people, and me included sometimes, that say, I wish I had more time for exercise. And the reality is, no, I don't. I really don't feel like getting up and getting on the treadmill right now. So we feel guilty about it. And so instead of admitting the truth, we might say, I wish I had more time to exercise. And that's even true of spending time with family members and significant others who we love, we cherish, they are an important part of our lives. But sometimes maybe, the amount of time we spend with them is enough. And I really would rather be spending time on other things that are making me feel more imbalanced. So guilt is another reason sometimes we don't talk the way I'm suggesting. Now, I wish I could tell you I had some magic wand that makes those barriers to thinking and talking the way I'm suggesting go away. I don't have the magic wand. But I know it starts with admitting that you're guilty. We all are, maybe not every day, maybe not today, but there are times I think we are all guilty of that kind of thinking. And it does get in the way of us doing the things that are going to help us feel like life is in balance, like we are feeling happy, we are feeling fulfilled. So we need to get beyond the guilt and admit the truth sometimes. And we also have to be willing, I think, to do the work. Just because it's easier to say I wish doesn't mean it's making us feel better. So sometimes we have to do the work to change some priorities that we have. And that's one of the things I want to move into here next. It brings me to what I think are the three important questions to ask yourself if you're looking to define what balance means to you. And remember, that's the first part of our agenda. The first question is, where am I currently spending my time? Now, if you're like me, and if you're like most people, you don't know the answer to that question. I sometimes teach a half day or even a full day time management program, and we used to do this in offsite in-person retreats. We don't do it in that format anymore, but I'll tell you, we did an exercise in that program where I would have people take out a blank sheet of paper and think back to the last 7 days of their life. Now, I know something detailed about the last 7 days of your life. I promise I haven't been spying on you. It's not that, but I know something detailed anyway. I know you did some set of stuff that added up to exactly 168 hours. So I say to people, write it down for me. And people always start with the big things. If you have a job, you probably can estimate at least how many hours in a week you worked. You'll put a number down for that. People put a number down for sleep. Even if it wasn't as much as they would have liked it to be, they can usually estimate a number of hours in a week that they slept. People often remember things about meals, and so they'll estimate time for eating, preparing meals. If there are regular hobbies you have, you'll put a number down there. But what always happens in this exercise, no matter how long I give people for it, is that by 10 minutes in or so, I see people scratching their head, they're crossing things out on the piece of paper. The vast majority of people in the room get up to about 145 or 150 before they just can't write anything else down. They don't know where they have spent all 168 hours of their week. There are a few people with really good memories. They keep track of things well in their head. They might get up to 160, and then they just can't write anything else down. Well, what that means is, even if you're one of the people who's great at this, you get up to 160, there are 8 unaccounted for hours in your week. 8 hours, and you just have no idea where they've gone. And if that's the case, how could you possibly say, I prioritize everything else I do with my time higher than spending more time with my kids, or higher than reading a good book every now and then, if that's what you're interested in doing? Because maybe all you need to do is account for the missing 8 hours. 8 more hours a week with your kids, that's a lot of hours. 8 hours to do some pleasure reading, if that's what's on your list, that's a good book that you could be reading every few weeks, right? And so my suggestion, start with this first question and don't do it in your head. Really keep track for a week or 2 weeks. At the end of every day, write down where your time did go. And at the end of a couple of weeks, you'll have a genuine inventory. This is where I'm spending the 168 hours of my week. Only after you've done that can you really ask questions 2 and 3. Where do I want to be spending my time? And that's essentially the same as our fill in the blank game. What do I wish I had time for? And then it's a really simple matter of asking yourself question 3. Do I prioritize all of the things on list number 1 higher than all of the things on list number 2? If the answer is yes, I have some bad news for you. You're not going to be able to do the things you wish you could do. But at least you've mapped it out and you can stop worrying about it. But here's the reality. Almost everybody I know, almost everybody that I've worked with that is willing to go through the disciplined exercise I just described, is willing to do this work, almost everybody discovers, you know what? No, I don't prioritize everything on list 1 higher than the things on list 2. There's this thing on list 1 now that I've been doing that I'm going to swap out, and I'm going to swap in something from list 2. It looks really easy to do on a slide like this. I know I'm talking about it in pretty simple ways. It's not as easy as it sounds on a slide, but this is what defining work-life balance looks like for you. I can't do it. Nobody else can do it for you. We all have to do it for ourselves. And so I hope this gives you some practical ways to think about that. All right, I want to move now to the second part of our agenda, which is about prioritization in these especially challenging times where it can just seem like there's too much going on. And I'm going to again ask you to do some reflection. I'm going to ask you to reflect on a recent day, anything that was going on in your life that made you feel things were spinning out of control, a day that felt utterly chaotic, and ask yourself, what happened that day? And I think there's a good chance it's something like one of the 3 bullets you see here. Maybe you'd overscheduled yourself. Maybe you had underestimated how long something was going to take, and so you didn't get all the things done that you were expecting to, and you were frustrated because of that. Or maybe, and this is the thing I think we're going to focus on now, maybe you did some things that day that now that you look back on it, didn't really have to get done that day. And so what's prioritization? It's about making sure that you control the day instead of letting the day control you. And I, again, want to give you what I think are some very simple and practical ways to think about how to do this. And it starts with understanding the 2 factors, the 2 biggest factors that go into prioritizing your day. They are importance and urgency. And I always like to give, even though these are pretty basic words, sometimes people get them confused. So I'm going to give some basic definitions. Importance is about rewards and consequences. It means if I get this thing done, how great will the feeling be at the end of getting it done? How great will the reward be at the end of getting it done? Or if I fail to get it done, how dire might the consequences be? That's importance. Urgency, on the other hand, has to do with time. It means how critical is it that this thing gets done now as opposed to some other time in the future. And so what I suggest you do, if you feel like life is spinning out of control, there's way too much to handle, you start by just writing it all down. All the tasks, all the activities, all the worries and concerns that might be making you feel that way. And once you've written them all down, you can start to recognize they are not all equal in terms of importance and urgency. They are different in terms of importance and urgency. And that starts to lead to this prioritization grid. So the day is spinning out of control. There's way too much that we want to do. We can't get it all done. We've written it all down. And now we try to put all those things into one of these 4 boxes. Now, hopefully what becomes apparent is that on these kinds of days, anything in box number 1, that's the upper right-hand quadrant. These are the things going on in your day that have the highest importance and the highest urgency. We are going to do those things. Those are the things we're going to focus on. And you know what? Anything in box 4, the lower left-hand corner of the screen here, we're just not going to do those. Now, sometimes when I say that, people respond to me by saying, but you know, some of those things in box 4, they're still pretty important. They're still pretty urgent. You're just telling me I'm not going to do those? Doesn't that mean I'm going to disappoint some people in my life and disappoint myself sometimes? And my answer to those people is, well, yeah, it does mean that you're going to disappoint some people in your life sometimes. And it does mean that you're going to be disappointed yourself sometimes that you don't get certain things done. But there's no alternative, right? If you have 25 hours of stuff to try to do, you are not going to get it all done. So what this is letting you take control of that. You take power of the situation instead of letting the situation control you. So yeah, you're going to disappoint some other people because their stuff falls in box 4. Now, I always give a little caveat here. This is a self-assessment tool. This is not a communication tool. So if someone comes up to you and says, hey, Kenny, I'd like you to work on this thing for me. Can you have it done by the end of the day? I don't suggest that you look back at that person and say, no, box 4, sorry, not going to do that. No, we need some other ways of communicating with other people about these things, but I think it is very helpful as a self-assessment tool. Now that brings me, though, to boxes 2 and 3 here. These might be the most important ones. The most critical ones when it comes to work-life balance. Because most people mix these up. They flip-flop boxes 2 and 3 to their own detriment. And that's why these are important. So box 2, that's the things that are really, really important to us. The things that if we get done, there is great reward, or if we fail to get them done, there could be really serious consequences. But the problem with box 2 is that these things never seem urgent. There never seems to be a reason that these things have to get done today as opposed to some other time in the future. Now I have some news for you. Guess what is in box 2? It's all the things that you filled in the blank with earlier in our little fill in the blank game. All the things that you've been saying to yourself, I wish I had more time for this or that, those are the things in box 2. Exercise, right? We all know you don't need me to come on a webinar to tell you about the importance of exercise, the great reward we get if we exercise. The problem with exercise is not that we don't understand the importance, it's that there never seems to be a reason it has to be done today as opposed to some other time in the future. Spending more time with my kids, same thing. We all know, we acknowledge in our head that we get great fulfillment out of spending time with our children, spending time with our family, devoting time and effort to relationships in our life. We know that, but it just never seems like it has to be done now, today, as opposed to some other time in the future. So that's what box 2 is, as opposed to box 3. Box 3 is things in our life that are actually not that important, but have a lot of seeming urgency. And at our detriment, at our expense, what we end up doing is spending a lot of our day, a lot of our time in box 3, and not nearly enough in box 2. We flip-flop these things. Now, what are the things in box 3? I can't tell you exactly what they are, but I can give you some clues. Technology plays a role in this. Your smartphone plays a role in this. Because what happens to us is that sometimes we've set things up so that things are constantly vibrating and buzzing, demanding our attention right now. So they are giving this sort of artificial urgency to themselves. And so we focus our time, our energy, our attention on those things. Now, are some of them also genuinely important, meaning they have great rewards and consequences? Yeah, some of them probably are, but some of them aren't. And so what I suggest we need to do, all of us, is reflect on what are those things in our own life? What are the things that I am giving artificial urgency to, I'm giving attention to, I'm giving time to, that are not actually making me feel fulfilled at all, that are not actually having significant reward or dire consequences? I'm just doing them because they are buzzing and vibrating in my pocket, or I'm getting alerts because somebody posted a new comment on my Facebook page. I'm just giving that as an example. It's really important, if you want to find work-life balance, to reflect on this. What are the things that I'm doing in box 3 at the detriment of box 2? And that's, I think, one of the real secrets to finding work-life balance, when we can reprioritize. I want to just illustrate some of this with an example before we move to the next part of our agenda. I'm going to give you an example of my friend. Her name is Julia. I've changed the name to protect the innocent, so that's not her real name. I called my friend Julia recently, and I started the conversation by asking her, hey, Julia, how's it going? And here's what she said in a really frantic sounding voice. She said, it's going terribly. My life is out of control. It started this morning. I couldn't get the kids out of bed, let alone come downstairs for breakfast. I finally get them set up for their Zoom meetings for school, and all of a sudden the internet goes out. As if I have time to get that fixed now. I got to start my own work day. And then to make matters worse, it's my partner's birthday this weekend. I promised to bake a cake and cook an elaborate meal, but there's no way I'm going to have time to do all that shopping and prep work. And then Julia went on and on. You can see some of the issues that she's got going on, making her feel frantic and out of control. Math homework for the daughter, a phone bill that's got some incorrect charges. Oh, and she really needs to exercise and is feeling terrible about not having done any of that. This is my friend Julia, and I give you this example of Julia so that I can make the point that this session we're doing today is partially a session about work-life balance, but it's also a session about how not to respond like this when your friend asks you, how's it going? Now, it's okay. I still love Julia. She's still a good friend. And I realize we have all probably had days just like this. And so what I try to do is help her out. How should Julia prioritize her day? What do you think some of the things on the right side of the screen, where do they fit? And I'm not going to ask you to really answer that now, but I want you to, again, just reflect on that. She was freaking out about making the kids breakfast, troubleshooting internet problems, shopping and prepping to bake a cake and cook an elaborate dinner, and you can see the other things. Now, here's the thing about this. You can put them in whatever box you want, and it might be the same as the box I put them in. It might be different. It might be the same as where Julia would put it, but it might be different. The only person who knows what box these things go in is Julia, because we don't have the context. She has the context. How old are the kids? Are there things they can make for breakfast themselves? I don't know the answer to that question, right? Is there somewhere else they can go that has internet and that I can go to get my work done that has internet? I don't know the answer to that either. And that's the point. Nobody has the answer to these questions except Julia, and nobody has the answers to them except you on the days that you are feeling like life is spinning out of control. So this prioritization grid, it's not a magic wand. It doesn't make the problems go away, but I hope what it is a helpful tool to help you find the solution for yourself when it just feels like it's impossible. It's spinning out of control. All right, next part of our agenda, it's a really important topic, and I want to spend a little bit of time on it today because when we think about work-life balance in this remote world so many of us are living in right now, I think it's important to reflect on the fact that loneliness was a big problem before the pandemic, and it's only getting worse for a lot of people. There's a lot of research that's been done about it. You can see some stats from one study that I've selected here. A majority of people in America report feelings of loneliness on a regular basis. More than a quarter of people say they either rarely or never feel as though there are people who really understand them. More than a third of people say they have no one they feel like they can turn to in a time of need. And this problem for a lot of people is getting worse. And again, no magic wands, no simple solutions, but it brings up I think a really important point about remote work and remote environments. And it's this kind of simple graphic here. If you want to stay feeling connected to people, the more time you spend working remotely, and for a lot of us that's 100% or close to it right now, the more proactive you need to be in connecting with people. When we all had a workplace, a campus that we were going to every day, we didn't need to work that hard to make connections. We would just run into people. We would see smiling faces every day and wave at people. And even that is a real meaningful human connection. So we didn't have to work that hard to make connections before. But that doesn't mean connections have gotten less important. They're just as important now as they ever were, but it's harder to make them. And so more proactive effort than ever is needed to combat this loneliness, this isolation problem. And so I just encourage all of us to think about what are we doing to be proactive about connecting with people, recognizing that it's so much more important now than it ever has been? Are we setting up enough pre-planned chats, virtual lunch dates with colleagues that we work with, maybe people that work in a completely different industry, but going out of our way to set up connection times with those people because we really need that proactivity? Can we make agreements sometimes in Zoom meetings that we might have that we're going to spend the first few minutes talking about some non-business matters so we can make some human connections sometimes? Instant messaging and making agreement with people about how we might use that. And I think also just really importantly recognizing that it's important to leave the house. Smile, say hello to people in a socially distant way, you know, even if it's across the street. The idea of being outside your house, seeing someone across the street and making the human connection where you wave and say hello, it's meaningful, it matters. And I think we have to work harder to make those connections now than we did when we were coming on site to work every day. So I just think that's something really important for us to think about. And we're going to move to our Q&A session in just a moment. So I want to just leave you with, I think, some final important self-care tools. I'm going to put them all up on the screen and just briefly touch on them. One is, I think it's really important to be cautious when we're striving for work-life balance about what we call avoidance coping techniques. Sometimes what we do to avoid doing the work to find work-life balance is we just turn on the TV and stare at the screen so we don't have to think about it, or we mindlessly surf the internet. Again, no magic wands, but being aware of that tendency can help us overcome it. Similarly, avoiding exposure, and I say sometimes for people it's obsession with media. I always ask people to ask themselves a simple question. If you're consuming media, social media or traditional media, whatever it might be, ask yourself, is this helping me feel better? Or is it making me feel worse? It's a simple question. I certainly think there's an amount of media to consume that helps us feel more in the know, helps us feel knowledgeable, and we like feeling that way about the world, and that's great. But we also sometimes reach a point where it's just making us feel worse. And so just get in the habit of asking yourself that question. Making me feel better or making me feel worse? I think maintaining routines as much as possible is really important. So that idea of exercising being important to you, for example, if you have said to yourself, I wish I had more time for exercise, I wish I had more time to spend with my kids, we need to build those two things into our week in a routine way rather than hoping they just come our way. So, for example, I'm going to exercise for 20 minutes at 7 a.m. every day. That routine is what's going to help us make it happen. Or I'm going to every Saturday morning from 10 to 11 do something one-on-one with my youngest child. That routine is what's going to help those things really happen. Choose your best relaxation and decompression strategy, whether it's listening to a favorite song, taking a walk around the block. And again, with that, build that into your routine too. Don't just hope you're going to remember to decompress and relax when the time comes. We need to build those things into our day. And then I always like to conclude by reminding people, I hope you found value in this webinar. I hope you find value in the Q&A we're about to do, but no webinar can solve all the complex problems people face in their life. I hope you won't hesitate to reach out for one-on-one support if you're going through some issues that are more complex than are going to be solved in a webinar. And with that, I'll close my part of the presentation, but of course I'll be sticking around for any questions that people might have. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much, Kenny. If you have any questions, feel free to type them in the Q&A box. And I think we do have one that I think Dave or Scott's going to ask.
You know, Kenny, this question is actually for me. I'm curious about what advice you would give to parents who are suddenly working in their home that have young children, and how they explain to the children that even though they're there during the normal time of the day that they'd be at work, that they're actually working, and how to do that in a way where you don't alienate your children or make them feel like they're not loved or wanted, or you're not happy to be spending time at home with them.
You know, that's a great question, David. Thank you for asking. And I do have two kids of my own at home too. I'm going to tackle it in two parts. One is, I think one of the most important things we can help our kids develop in this era we're living in now is a sense of resilience, a sense of their own strength, their own ability to overcome difficulty. We're living through difficult times now. And what can happen if we're not careful is when we live through difficult times, our kids can form a mindset that says, I'm too weak to handle these difficult times. And I bring that up because I think it's really important to just level with kids during this time. Be honest with them about the difficulties that we're facing right now. It is hard for dad. It is hard for mom to work at home with distractions going on. And it's probably hard for you to have mom and dad at home and want our attention and not be able to get it at the times you need it. So acknowledging that that's hard and showing them that you believe that they can do it anyway, I think is really important. So leveling with kids and helping them build that resilience is one way I wanted to tackle that question. The other side of that question is getting over our own guilt as a parent. And I've had to do this sometimes because my kids, for better or worse, I'm lucky and not lucky in this regard. They will entertain themselves by staring at their device all day watching YouTube videos. And that's great for me when I'm trying to get my work done, except when I start feeling really guilty about the fact that I'm letting my kids stare at their YouTube videos all day. And I sometimes have to remind myself of this. You are not going to be a perfect parent at times like this. I'm not going to be a perfect parent. You're not going to be a perfect parent. Forgive yourself for letting your kids stare at the YouTube videos all day sometimes. It's the only way through it sometimes. So I think, those are the two ways that I try to tackle that really important question. Thanks for asking it.
And you have another question from an attendee. What are some of the strategies you might use when you have competing priorities? For example, healthy cooking, exercising, spending time with kids, dogs, or etc. They're all important, and yet we all have this fixed time. It sounds like a box 2, box 3 tension, but it sounds like you have a lot of things that are important, and it's hard to discern which ones are more important than others. It's like a relative importance. How do you go about putting those in order, for example?
Yeah, that's a good question. And, I wish I could say there's a formula, right? There isn't. It's judgment. And I think what happens, I talked about avoidance coping briefly before. What a lot of us do, and I certainly wouldn't suggest that the person asking the question is doing this, it's just a human nature thing, is instead of doing the work to make a judgment of which is more important to us, we don't do the work and we just feel frustrated by the fact that there isn't enough time in the day. That's avoidance coping, right? Because there is no perfect answer. If there's only enough time today to either spend an hour with my kids or get an hour of exercise, there is no easy answer to that question. But there's also nobody better positioned to make the judgment than you. And so we've got to do the work to make the judgment and live with the judgment we make. We might change that judgment tomorrow. We might say, you know what, I made the wrong judgment yesterday. I'm gonna make a different judgment today or next week about it. The important point, though, is we've got to keep doing the work ourselves instead of avoiding the question, which is when we avoid the question, we feel helpless. We feel hopeless in these situations. And so it's like a lot of things you probably do every day in your work. You've got to, at work, and I think a lot of people are really good at this in their professional life, make judgments about what's more important than something else. What am I going to tackle and what am I not going to tackle? A lot of us are really good about making those judgments at work, even though we know they're imperfect, we know they might be wrong, and we might have to reassess later, and more hesitant to make those judgments in their personal life. So I'd say, be as willing to be decisive in your personal life as you are in your professional life with those kinds of situations.
Let me ask a somewhat related question. Has work at home, since this is about that as well as work-life balance, has that altered the nature of the tension between boxes 2 and 3, or is it still just the same issue and work from home just becomes perhaps another reason to not prioritize and procrastinate? Is there an effect there?
I think work from home has a big effect on it. I think, because we are spending more of our time, at least a lot of us, more of our time glued to not just one device, sometimes multiple devices. That phenomenon I talked about earlier where artificial urgency gets created is increased now. We are more likely to be sitting in a place where something is going to buzz, some alert is going to pop up on our screen than we ever have been before. And so I think that is a risk. You know, one thing that I suggest in that regard is something really tangible. Reflect on the kinds of alerts, the technology alerts that exist in your life, and get rid of the ones you don't really need. You know, I'll give you an example. I have an email system, like a lot of people do, that if it's not set up the way I want it to be set up, every time a new email comes in, no matter what else I'm doing, something will pop up on the bottom right-hand corner of the screen telling me that a new email came in. Do I need that? Now, maybe some people are in a job where they do need that and then don't turn it off. But I think a lot of us allow that alert to pop up on the screen even though we don't need it. Turn those alerts off if you don't need it. Do you need the vibration or the alert coming on your mobile phone when someone new comments on your Facebook post? Probably not. It can wait until you decide you want to go check the comments on your Facebook post. So I think, you know, there is an increase in that risk now. And so it's a good idea to go through some concerted effort to turn off the alerts that we don't really need to be creating that artificial urgency these days.
And let me pass along another question from an attendee. And this is one I found affects me personally as well, so I really relate to it. But pre-COVID, there was this physical boundary between work and life. It's like I had two families. I had a work family, and I had, obviously, a home family. And there were issues and tensions and great things at home, and at work there were similar kinds of things. And now it's a big jumble. Because we're at home most of the time. And so you have trouble separating them. And I can't go to one place to relieve tension from another, for example. How is that factoring into this? And especially about, as we think about, you know, it's work-life balance, but also just working and living well.
Yeah, you know, that's so hard because it affects everybody so individually. One thing that I try to reflect on for myself, and it's helped some other people, is I think sometimes we exaggerate the separation that existed before. There might have been this sort of physical separation that existed before, but the reality was always that if my kid was sick, for example, or was struggling in school, that was affecting me at work, even if I was on campus and separate from my home. In fact, it might have been affecting me more. It might have made me feel worse because I couldn't be there. I wasn't close to, so it might have actually, my home life might have been impacting me more when I was away from people. So to some extent, I think this is a matter of being willing to change our own perception about these things and just realize this was always an issue. It will always be an issue. There will be times that we wish we had more separation between our work and our home life. And there will also be times that we wish we had more connection between our work and our home life, where we wish that we could bring, for example, we wish that we could be handling all of our work meetings and still able to check in with our family and find out that everything is okay at home. And so no perfect answer to the question, but I think it's helpful to reflect on the fact that this isn't really a new problem. It's sort of changing shape a little bit, but it's something that we've probably been coping with for a long time.
Yeah, I think we have time for one more question. Dave, do you have a question for Kenny?
I do. Kenny, this question has to do with how you're working from home and you start to get a sense or realize that you might be struggling. So the question is, how would someone recognize that they need to seek help? Maybe there's a slight change in mood, but not significant enough. And what would be the first step and to find the right fit on what type of help they might need or seek?
Yeah, I mean, great question. First of all, I guess I want to encourage people to think that there doesn't have to be a clear-cut sign, I need help, right? We can all use help. So good for you for even asking the question, because sometimes the best times to seek help with your personal life is when things are going pretty well, actually. You're feeling pretty good, but you think that finding fulfillment would, there might be some tips and ideas someone can give you to help you find even more fulfillment. So I want to encourage you not to wait for a moment, a particular sort of assessment you've done that says now is the day that I really need to get help because this happened or that happened. If you're thinking about it, try it out. You don't have to make a long-term commitment to the professional help that you're getting, but try it out. In terms of how to do it, you know, I come from your employee assistance program. That's a great place to start. Our website is guidanceresources.com. It's not a sales plug. It's an answer to the question. It's free of charge, so that's how I can promise you it's not a sales plug. To just try it out. Get some help through your employee assistance program at guidanceresources.com, or I've got a slide and I can put it up if we have a moment that has the phone number to call also, and you can just talk to somebody about getting yourself set up with some counseling help if you might be interested in that.
That's great. Thank you so much. We are at time because we want to make sure that we purposely scheduled 50 minutes, not an hour. That's a good Zoom practice, frankly. If you, instead of hour meetings, always try to end at 10 minutes till, so that people have time to take that break, to stand up, to take a walk, to get a drink. So thank you so much, Kenny Zuckerberg from our EAP, and we will send out the contact information for the EAP. And also a big thanks to our co-hosts, Joslyn and Dave Leinen, for being willing to take some time to share their own experience with work-life balance. And I'm going to go ahead and share as a final message the next 6 webinars that are available. Basically every Tuesday at either 11 or 12, you've got the opportunity. There are some more webinars that are much more tailored, like young children at home or adult children, older generations, living alone, as well as things like mental resiliency and managing remote workers. These are all really important topics. So thank you all. I'm sorry we didn't get to all the questions. There were a few left. Feel free to reach out to me directly, pamela.james at uci.edu, and I'll make sure I try to get you some answers. So with that, I'll say farewell. Have a great afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for your time. Bye.